artillery commander. It's a name you might want to learn. His name is Henry Knox. There is a fort in Tennessee named after him, and there is a city named after him. So if you've heard of Knoxville, Tennessee, or Fort Knox, that's Henry Ox Knox. And I'll tell you a story about old Henry Knox when we go to cross the Delaware here in a minute. Okay, so one of the things the Brits did is they said, well, it doesn't make sense hang out in Boston. Here's Boston. If it's green, it's a Patriot stronghold. So is Boston green? You bet. It's like the capital. So they said, let's pick a pink area. Pink area down here says loyalist strongholds. And by far the most obvious, because of its huge port, New York City. So they're going to sail towards New York. They're going to leave Boston, evacuate Boston, bring thousands of dudes down, come land actually in the Hamptons and start walking across Long Island. I do point this out because it is noticeable how little America's economy was doing. I mean, we virtually did not have an economy during the Revolution. You see the red here? Now, the reason the blue kicks up is that we start trading with France. Okay? But by and large, you know, between us being at war with the British and the fact or presence of a British Navy, all the American economy basically is crushed. So we're going to see the Brits relocate here. And so this is Long Island, where a lot of the troops will be stationed out here. And this is Manhattan Island. Washington actually fights directly against Israel Putnam's army right here. It's the Battle of New York, the Battle of Long Island. Here we go. But he is defeated. You can see this part here. And he retreats actually through Queens and across lower Manhattan and then into New Jersey. So, you know, that is a huge defeat for George Washington. The city of New York will be in flames. His army has to retreat and things look really bleak. So if you're looking at this map, here's, again, you know, they've relocated, particularly General Howe has relocated down here to New York. And this is where he's going to stay for the remainder of the war. So, you know, there's sort of like a northern force of the British Army, and it's headquartered in New York because there were lots of loyalists in New York. This is the thing when I was showing you women spies, the Culper spy ring. This is the group of spies that are going to spy on the British in New York and report back to Washington through his spy network. All right. But, you know, this is the moment when it becomes pretty clear that the revolutionaries may lose. New York has been taken. It's a huge army there. And it's one of those moments where, you know, if you're a football team or baseball, I remember a couple of years ago when my favorite team won the World Series, Washington Nationals. But earlier in the season, they were 19-31. So after 50 games, they were on the verge of having a really terrible losing season. And then they came back and won the World Series. So it was a great feeling, right? Didn't happen this year. But nonetheless, Thomas Paine is going to write another pamphlet. So Paine is our leading pamphleteer. And he is going to write a line that is perhaps, it almost sounds Shakespearean. That's one of the most influential lines about loyalty to America. He says, these are the times that try men's souls. It's wintertime, it's Christmas, and people are despairing. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink. So, in other words, there are plenty of people who fly an American flag, put a bumper sticker on their car, and are what we call summer soldiers or sunshine patriots. So, everything's great in your country when things are great, right? But he that stands now, your winter soldier, right, deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. So in other words, it's hard to be a devoted patriot when you're getting beaten badly. And we were getting beaten badly, we being Americans. All right. And so he says, you know, this is going to be a period where if Britain wins, will enforce its tyranny and bind us on everything. And that will be slavery, he says. So we are not going to be summer soldiers. We're going to be winter patriots, right? So this is where Washington pulls off one of his great moments as a military leader. Now, this event is not actually an enormously significant military battle. meaning it doesn't turn the outcome of the war. It doesn't change history forever. But it is a very important event because what it does is it saves the morale of the American patriot cause. So what Washington does, now keep in mind, he's been chased back out of New York, across New Jersey, and over the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. Okay. So he's in Pennsylvania and he decides, now keep in mind, the Brits are using German mercenaries, right? Hessians. And he has gotten from his spies where some of these Hessians are headquartered or stationed. And they're stationed in two small towns in New Jersey, Trenton and Princeton. So he marches his men on Christmas Eve, 1776. And then in the dawn, or the early pre-dawn, they cross over the Delaware River. Now, I can't help but talk about this painting since it's the most one of the most famous paintings in all of American history. The painting, of course, is famously known as Washington Crossing the Delaware. But there's several things about this artifact that I want you to consider. First, the name of the painter, Emanuel Lurtz. Secondly, the date. So that alone should tell you something, since he's describing or painting an event from 1776. Clearly, this individual was not a witness to this event. In fact, this individual is a German immigrant in 1848 who was coming to America and despairs that America seems to be pulling itself apart in the 1850s. So he decides to create a monumental work of patriotism. And he takes the event from the American Revolution of when Washington's army sneaks across the Delaware River on barges, okay? But his rendition of it is completely fanciful. First of all, there are no icebergs in the Delaware River. So it looks like he's crossing like a glacier-filled pond, right? Secondly, the shining light in the distance is not accurate at all. It was pitch black, almost completely dark. But it seems like as if Washington is steering us out of the darkness into the light, right? Also, the seven figures, well, let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's 11 total figures. Two of them represent, I think, the same type. Represent all the major occupations of America. So they're like the worker people of America. You've got mechanics in there, you got farmers in there. They're also representing their countries of nationality. You'll see an Irish hat on this guy, for example. There is an African American here, Prince Whipple. And it's all this interesting depiction of America as a collective. There is an American flag flying that had not been adopted yet. George Washington is standing at the vanguard, at the front of the trip across. He was on the last boat across the Delaware, and he was seated. So virtually everything about this is completely fanciful. It's a great work of propaganda, not to win the revolution, but to try to hold Americans together for patriotism. You understand? And that's why the time is so very important. Now, it does help restore confidence. And I want you to see this because this is a group of my students when I took them to the Met. This is the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Many people don't realize how freaking big that painting is. So one of the hallmarks of the painters of the 40s and 1840s and 50s is their massive works. So that's a collection of my students from about 7 years ago. There's my son right there. Yeah, so anyway, big painting. This picture is much closer to it, although again, Washington would not have been standing with a cannon. These are flat bottom barges that were pulled across the Delaware. You'll notice the absence of like glacial ice and things like that. Notice no light. But nonetheless, he goes across the Delaware River. He attacks the sleeping Hessians. Now remember, it's Christmas. Germans, throughout history, known for their love of beer. They invented it, right? And so they got absolutely hammered on Christmas Eve. That's kind of what you would do in America if you were a hired mercenary. And so when Washington marches in to Trenton, they're passed out in the morning. They're still sleeping one off on Christmas Day, and then he attacks them. And they surrender, and he captures a fairly decent amount of troops in this battle. He pulls off the same thing again a couple days later down in Princeton. So while this is where, he'll become known as the Fox. Washington had always ridden what was called to the hounds, meaning they would take special hunting dogs and chase after foxes, right? Well, now the British are the hounds and Washington is the fox, and he's doing a good job of outfoxing the British, so to speak. So he will get this little victory, and it's important for what we call morale. It's a morale booster. But the most important battle of the war comes here. Comes here, and it's in upstate New York, same place as where Benedict Arnold had won the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga, so to speak, battle, the attack on Fort Ticonderoga. Now you have General Gates, Horatio Gates, capturing Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne's entire army. Now, that's a British army, so you're talking about thousands of soldiers being captured by an American army. So I want to take you back for a minute to the year 1777, and I'm going to take you back to this map right here. So the Brits, General Howe, and others had decided that they would come up with a three-pronged strategy to cut off the head of the revolution. So if you think about New England as like the head of the revolutionary movement, if you come down and sever New York from New England, then you can kind of choke New England out, right? It's not a bad strategy. So you had three different forces, three different British armies. You had Burgoyne's, which I just mentioned, that would come down Lake Champlain, past Ticonderoga, right? You had Barry St. Leger would come down the St. Lawrence River and across what is today the Erie Canal, that area, it wasn't there then, but through central New York. And then you would have General Howe, who was in Manhattan, come up the Hudson River. So you can kind of see 1, 2, 3, and anybody who was there would be captured or killed. But Howe takes it upon himself, just kind of on his own. He doesn't really want to go to upstate New York. He's like, I can do something else better, quicker. So rather than go up the Hudson River, he puts his men on ships and sails them up the Potomac River, excuse me. And up the Potomac, he then unloads them and they attack Philadelphia. So this is one of those moments where the Congress, remember the Continental Congress? They have to run away. They have to flee Philadelphia and go meet in like country farmhouses and stuff. So in other words, the nation's leadership run away. And he successfully takes over Philadelphia. But in the meantime, this happens. See, he was supposed to come up and meet Burgoyne, right? Howe was supposed to come up the Hudson River. Well, instead of Howe coming up the Hudson River, Gates comes up the Hudson River. And so as Burgoyne is kind of creeping down, he runs slam into a double American force at a town called Saratoga. And it's in that battle that Howe's entire force is defeated and surrenders. This is a monumental victory. First of all, it wipes out one of those major armies altogether. Secondly, it's going to send Howe screaming back to New York because he doesn't want to lose the rest of his army in New York. But most importantly, it's going to lead to success in France because we're not going to win the revolution if we don't have help. Now, the Continental Congress had already voted to dispatch Benjamin Franklin as the ambassador for the United States to the court at Versailles. So Franklin travels secretly to France. He speaks French. He wears his coonskin hat with knowing that that's a popular move. Now, keep in mind, the French absolutely love Ben Franklin. They love it. Okay. He is an older man, but he speaks French. He loves French food. He loves French women. He likes the fineries of France, the wine. He is a scientist. In fact, he will be installed into 2 different French science academies while he's there. So they celebrate him as sort of the epitome of Rousseau's noble savage. He comes from the outdoor sort of frontiersy America, and he dresses the part. Yet he is an intellectual and brilliant. So he's like the totally well-rounded person, and the French just love that. And so he's hanging out with them, working on what's called a model treaty. But initially, the French aren't going to become our friend, right? Until this battle. What they were doing was they were hedging their bets. Louis is broke. Louis XVI owes so much money. He's not really interested in helping the Americans fight the English yet again, but he hates the British. And so his advisors and he have decided they can't really help the colonists unless they get a victory. Well, Saratoga is a huge victory. And so with that victory, Franklin is able to negotiate a Franco-American alliance. a peace treaty between France and America. And that's a huge deal because something like 90% of every gun, bullet, and gunpowder used in the American Revolution by the Patriots will come from France. So they're going to equip us. They're going to provide us with loans. They're going to have a navy that will help. And by doing this, Britain now has to focus their attention back on Europe because Britain can't fight in America full while Europe is at war with them too, while France certainly. So this is an enormous event. And I do want you to know that. And we'll close with that today. Okay.